Good to see everyone. I'm Dr. Gabriela Baiza Ventura. I am professor of Spanish in the Department of Hispanic Studies and Deputy Director at Arte Público Press and co-director of the U.S. Latino Digital Humanities Center here at the University of Houston. On behalf of Arte Público, Recovering the U.S. Hispanic Literary Heritage and usLdh, and on behalf of my colleagues, we welcome you to this talk. As many of you know, Arte Público and Recovery, two important forces in the field of U.S. Latino studies, were founded by Dr. Nicolás Canelos, who is a recent recipient of the National Medal for the Humanities. His vision to establish the nonprofit press and the historical archival program stemmed from a social justice need to document the legacy of Latinos and Latino culture and literature in the United States. To date, Arte Público has published over 700 books in fiction, nonfiction, including YA and children's literature. And Recovery has located over 1,500 newspapers and digitized thousands of records that document the presence of the Latinx people in the land that we now know as the United States. The social justice need continues to this day as we fight against the erasure of our bodies and language on a daily basis. Therefore, the need to create a center that could use these resources for digital scholarship was and is imminent. My colleague, Dr. Carolina Villarroel, and I began the U.S. Latino Digital Humanities Center 8.5 years ago with the generous support from the Mellon Foundation. And we are happy to report that we have made and are making important strides in this field. We have grown our team to include Dr. Lorena Gothero as Digital Programs Manager. And together, we organize talks and workshops on digital humanities, DH, and social justice. We present at conferences across the U.S., train and mentor students and faculty from all academic levels, as well as community members on U.S. Latino DH praxis. We create digital projects and data sets. We have awarded over 25 grants in aid for U.S. Latino humanities projects and our training. And this has solidified our usLdh mission to continue working and supporting research. Research on the U.S. Latino and Latino written legacy. We invite you to visit our website, artepublicopress.com, for more information, to follow us on social media, and to use the hashtag usLdh to share information on our lectures about usLdh and Latino history. Lore, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Gabi. Before I introduce our guest, I would like to go over a few logistics for the Q&A. So please feel free to use the chat function to type in your questions or comments. And after the presentation, you'll be invited to ask questions by unmuting yourselves, or if you prefer, you can write it in the chat and I will read it to our speaker. So now allow me to present Dr. Amanda Licastro. She is the head of digital scholarship and visiting associate professor in English at Swarthmore College, as well as the pedagogical director of the Book Traces Project and an Andrew W. Mellon Senior Fellow in Critical Bibliography. Amanda serves on the editorial collective of the Journal of Interactive Technology and Pedagogy and on several committees for the Modern Language Association. Her research explores the intersection of technology and writing, including book history, dystopian literature, and digital humanities. You can find her work in the co-edited collection, Composition and Big Data, as well as in Hybrid Pedagogy, Kairos, and Digital Reading and Writing in Composition Studies. Help me welcome Amanda, and thank you so much. The floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I put a link to my slides in the chat that I hope are accessible. They do have alt text for images. If you need anything else in terms of accessibility, please do let me know, especially if you can't hear me well. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and share. Can everyone see my slides? Okay, wonderful. Thank you so much for having me today, and thank you for all the organization that went on behind the scenes to make this possible. I really appreciate all of your time and efforts. I'm coming to you from Philadelphia, from the traditional lands of the Lenape, and from Swarthmore College, which is a small liberal arts college right outside of Philadelphia. I'm here to talk to you today about immersive realities in the humanities, but I'm going to try to really focus on the wonderful mission of this group and of the wonderful organizers as I curate my examples and talk through very specific instances of where I think immersive realities have been successful in terms of both amplifying the work we do in the humanities and in terms of social justice. So hopefully this will work. Nope. Hold on one second. There we go. Okay. So I'm going to start by offering some definitions. For those of you who are already familiar with immersive technologies, this might be familiar to you, but for those who are new, I want to make sure we all have a shared terminology. I'm going to give you some of those examples I just described. Then I'm going to introduce a variety of tools that are either completely free or freemium, based on access that you might have through your institutions or other work environments. And then I'm going to give you some time to play around with those tools, to experiment and explore, and then we'll have some discussion at the end. So I want to talk about why I might integrate emerging technologies into the curriculum and into my professional life in a cultural heritage institution. And that really comes down to these three words that you see on the screen. The first one is accessibility, and I want to offer the definition of accessibility in a variety of ways. First of all, we're talking about legal accessibility. And we know that a lot of knowledge is actually behind walled gardens, right? It's locked down, it's gated. You can only gain access to those tools if you have institutional access or if you have economic access or geographic access. So part of my job as a librarian and as an educator is to find ways to provide the most people with the most access possible. And when we're talking about immersive realities, especially, that can really have a lot to do with that economic access and how expensive some of these tools are. So finding alternative solutions for that problem. And I also very much mean access in terms of ability and disability. So how we interact with content, through what modes we access content. And immersive realities provides a different conduit for us to engage with multimodal content. And that really leads me to that next word you see there, which is inclusion. And I mean that in terms of being inclusive as to who can access content, but also who's represented in that content, right? The people we see reflected, the themes, the stories we see reflected in the content that we're consuming, but also as creators of content. So the more that we can expose young learners, early career folks to these new technologies, the more we can diversify the creators of the future. And last but not least, as a librarian, I'm really in the business of democratizing access to knowledge, right? That is my ultimate goal for thinking through how we can use these technologies to make sure that what we have in our collections is not just for the folks who come through our doors, but for as many people as possible. So this is the place I'm coming from, is I'm always going to evaluate the digital tools, especially the emerging technologies that I'm considering through the lens of these three frameworks. So what am I talking about when I'm talking about immersive technologies? This you see here before you, the reality virtuality continuum. And please note that this is from 1994, which is ancient in the world of emerging technologies. But the reason I still use this is because it really does present it as an evolving evolution of terms, right? That is not fixed, but in fact is always changing. And if you see way over here on the left side is the real environment. So we can assume that that's where we are, right? I can knock on my table, I can feel the breeze from my window. Now, there's more evidence that we're living in a simulation every day, and we can take that up with the philosophy department. But for today, we're going to assume that this is reality. And then on the far right side, you see the virtual environment. And this is what we often refer to as VR or virtual reality. And this involves sensory deprivation. You're usually wearing a headset or you're immersed in a VR cave or some other area that's blocking out your lived environment and kind of forcing you to focus on a computer simulated environment. That can either be a cinematic environment that is filmed with 360-degree cameras of real places with real people, or it can be a simulated environment, so computer generated in the terms of animation and video games. But either way, the point is to no longer be engaging with your lived environment and instead be fully immersed in a virtual environment. Where it gets tricky is in the middle here. Today, we're going to focus a lot on augmented reality, AR, that you see in the middle here. And maybe you can put up your little virtual hands if you've ever done an augmented reality application. So this could include the very famous Pokemon Go, where you chase Pikachu across your lawn. More often now, it's often filters. So you think of Snapchat filters, you think of filters on Instagram. You might also see augmented reality in IKEA or Amazon, where it asks you if you want to view your chair in your environment. You can hold up your phone and see what that chair would look like in your living room. Or even Sherwin-Williams now has an app where you can see different color paint on your wall, right? So these are all augmented reality apps. They are putting a digital object into your lived environment. It's augmenting your lived environment with digital objects. What I want to talk about is how we're seeing this more and more in terms of the umbrella term you see above, and that's mixed reality. So in my opinion, where the industry is really going is towards this mixed reality future where you can switch seamlessly between an entirely virtual environment, a VR environment, and a digitally augmented lived environment or augmented reality. So the newest headsets you see, like the Apple Vision, the Meta Quest 2, some of the glasses that are now becoming popular. So things like the Ray-Bans, the Meta Ray-Bans, right, are working in this mixed reality format where, for example, maybe you're designing a building completely in virtual reality with a team from around the world, and then you can go on site, double tap that device and see what that building would look like where you're actually going to be building at the build site. You also see this in a lot of fun entertainment style games where, for example, one really popular game is called First Encounters, where you're in outer space on a spaceship, and all of a sudden these space pigeons come onto your ship, you double tap, and the space pigeons are all over your house, right? And you're chasing them all over your bedroom. Right, so these kind of where you can slip seamlessly in and out is where we're really seeing the industry going, and I think presents new opportunities for those of us who are working in digital storytelling and cultural heritage institutions. If you have any questions about any of that, please let me know. Okay. So the reason why introducing some of these immersive technologies into the classroom might be effective is because of the immense amount of research we have on kinesthetic learning. So for my friends in the audience who are K through 12 instructors, you don't need to be told this. You know that kinesthetic learning is extremely effective for young learners. We often see elementary school students learning through play, what Vygotsky called the zone of proximal development. So that's where you play at something to develop skills you don't currently have but are working towards. But we often forget about that in terms of higher education or continuing education or lifelong education. We forget how important it is to really use our hands, to really be active learners that are both physically and mentally engaged in a project. And as you can see from the quote that I have in front of you, The data really does show that kinesthetic learning helps for improved retention, it helps for improved satisfaction and participation, but also that it improves transfer. So, for example, Arizona State University held a multi-year study with thousands of students in their Biology 101 and 102 courses. They had a control group that was doing traditional labs, and then they had an experimental group that was using a VR lab for both Biology 101 and 102. What they found was that the learners who used the virtual reality lab not only scored an entire letter grade higher in those two classes, but they scored an entire letter grade higher in the next two levels up in their biology curriculum as well. So again, that learning is transferring to the more difficult content. And that's really part of the goal of using this kind of kinesthetic, hands-on, active learning. So now I'm going to give you some examples. And first, I'm going to kind of talk about the broad categories or the buckets that these examples fall in. And then I'm going to explain the examples themselves. So the first way that I see immersive reality is being used in a very effective way in the humanities and for cultural institutions is through virtual or augmented reality tours. So this could be where you have, a physical structure, a historic site, a museum, and you're taking 360-degree capture of the inside of the building, or LiDAR or photogrammetry scans of the outside or the architecture of the building. You could also be scanning individual elements of that collection. So items from the archive, whether that be two-dimensional art or three-dimensional sculpture or other items from an archival collection. But you're doing this to create a tour that might be experienced completely virtually. So in a virtual reality headset, off-site, right? So for someone who cannot access that physical site for a variety of reasons, or you might be creating an enhanced in-person tour. So I'm at the site and I'm using my device to learn more about the objects that are in front of me. In the example you see in front of you, you have University of Miami art history students who created a tour of colonial Spanish art in a local chapel. So they scanned the interior and exterior along with the paintings in the chapel. And they did research on all of these elements to create a guided tour of this space. And the professor involved actually said that he usually brought students physically to this space, but during the lockdown portion of the pandemic, he could not bring students physically to the space. So he was looking for an alternative way to engage with this content that didn't involve a field trip. And what he realized and what his students realized is that a lot of people can't physically come to this chapel. That might be because of geographic reasons. That might be because they are homebound, right? Or have other physical limitations that doesn't allow them to interact with the space. It also might be because they don't feel welcome in the space, which unfortunately is a reality of a lot of our cultural institutions and historic sites. So thinking about how to provide greater access not only to the local community, but to others who might not have access for a variety of reasons. So again, the link to the slides are in the chat, and I have all of these projects linked for you so you can do more research in more depth. Another example that I wanted to talk about was using virtual and augmented reality to engage with spaces that no longer exist. Now, this could be spaces that have been destroyed over time, destroyed because of war or terrorism. They could no longer exist because they were a temporary site that was never meant to exist long term. But how do we preserve not just maybe the two-dimensional realities of the site, but what it feels like to be embodied, to walk around, to be present in these sites. So you can see an example before you, but I actually want to talk about another example as well, which is a wonderful application called Yourscape. So Yourscape is a virtual reality application that allows you to tour ancient Rome, ancient Greece, and Mexico, and you can start the tour as how these spaces look now, and then you can actually be transported into specific times in history, and then you get a tour with archaeologists and historians of that place and time who kind of talk about what happened in that space, how we know how it looked at that time, and how they're creating the recreations of spaces that no longer look the same. In the example you see before you here, we have a place that was destroyed, in a military battle, and we're talking about trying to capture some of the stories that were lost when that place was lost. Obviously, something like this takes a great deal of thoughtful, community-engaged research, where you're really thinking about how to represent something that no longer exists authentically, and in a way that's not doing more harm, that's not causing a tragedy tourism or a toxic re-embodiment, but rather an authentic engagement with those stories. This is why we need humanists doing this work, right? Now, for a little bit more of a fun example, you can also think about taking art out of the context of a museum and bringing it into people's lives. So, for example, we have a wonderful collection of botany from Robert Palmer at my institution in the Friends Historical Library. These are sketches of plants and herbs, right, well documented by this researcher. And we created a virtual augmented reality tour of our arboretum that's part of our campus using these illustrations from the Friends Historical Library, right? So that's bringing art out of the archive and actually bringing it into nature to help educate our patrons about what they're seeing in nature from a historical lens. The example that you see in front of you here was a collaboration with two museums and Facebook, which I have a lot to say about Facebook and virtual reality. We can talk about in discussion, but this was a collaboration to bring specific works of art into people's homes, into people's everyday lives through a platform that many people use already, Facebook and Instagram. So using filters on social media that people are playing around with, that are comfortable using, in order to showcase why you might want to have some of this art in your space and what it would mean to kind of amplify and present this art in a different context outside of a museum that might, again, be impossible for people to access for a variety of reasons. Another way of engaging with this content is to think about current issues and how we might amplify or render more visible some of the conflicts that we feel are very important to talk about right now in the humanities. This example you see in front of you is actually, I think, one of the most powerful examples for me personally. And this is the border wall used with an application called the Fourth Wall app. So this is thinking about people who have never seen the wall at the Mexico-US border, bringing that to them in a very real, tangible, visceral way, thinking about what it would mean for a wall to separate you from the people and places that you love. I really, really encourage you to engage with the link here, to engage with the wonderful story that this researcher tells through this through this application and to think about other ways that we can use these technologies to make issues that sometimes people can ignore, push aside, scroll past, and really kind of invite them to grapple with them in a more personal way. And last but not least is this example from Peter DeSherney, who I worked with at the University of Pennsylvania, who used virtual reality in a way very similar to documentary filmmaking. So he's a documentary filmmaker by training, and there have been actually many very significant documentary films made for virtual reality. There's actually now Emmy for virtual reality. There's a segment of the Sundance Film Festival for virtual reality and the Tribeca Film Festival for virtual reality, because there's so much interest in thinking about how to create immersive documentary films. And this one here about Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria follows some of the community that was most heavily impacted, but not in a way that follows their tragedy or what they lost, but rather follows their joy and creation and artistic spirit. Again, an example of how to work very closely with the community to tell authentic and joyful stories. This was very much a reaction to a very heavily criticized occurrence where Mark Zuckerberg from Facebook did a flyover of Puerto Rico after Hurricane Maria, just showing the destruction from above and not engaging at all with the community, not engaging at all with a sense of activism or action or altruism, but rather just voyeurism and gawking at the destruction. So you can see very poorly done examples of this that cause, maybe more harm and more misinformation, or you can see examples that really are working to be a voice of authenticity and representation in the space. So on that note, I want to talk a little bit about the empathy debate. This is a personal interest of mine in the immersive realities field. I'm very interested in how every discipline defines empathy differently and how none of us actually really agree on the definition of empathy. But also we increasingly are seeing empathy as being weaponized against people, as being used politically for a variety of harmful purposes. So this TED Talk that you see captured on the screen was done by Christopher Milk, who's again a documentary filmmaker, who was talking about how VR can be the ultimate empathy machine because you walk in someone else's shoes. And he was talking about a collaboration he did with Gabo Aurora on an VR application called Clouds Over Sidra, where you go to a Syrian refugee camp and hear a Syrian girl kind of describe her daily life there. There was a lot of criticism over that application. First of all, the translation was done by someone who wasn't a native speaker, and there was very much a sense of voyeurism that, like, oh, these poor people, this is so terrible, rather than let's listen to their authentic stories and believe them and work to change. Christopher Milk and Gabor did end up bringing this to the G20 summit to try to influence the conditions under which folks were living in the refugee camp, but there's still a lot of I think ill will or ill feelings around some, basically two white men coming to a community they're not a part of and kind of trying to say, like, hey, our point of view on this is more important than hearing from the people themselves. And this was responded to by one of my favorite scholars, Lisa Nakamura, in an incredible piece called Feeling Good About Feeling Bad, which I can't recommend highly enough. And in this piece, she talks about how a lot of these companies, these technology companies, are commodifying or profiting off of racial suffering in these applications. They're basically getting us to pay for feeling better. Like, oh, I watched this. Now I understand. Now I feel better. Now I'm kind of absolved of needing to do anything or take any action. So as Lisa Nakamura says here, we really need forms of critique for these emerging technologies, and we really need to be able to understand how to not only critique existing content, but produce new content that is bringing all of our expertise from the humanities, and especially for those of us who do community engaged work, bringing that expertise to these new forms of technology to make sure that we're producing content that that is not only educational, but really authentic in our representations, and is really working very deeply with the communities that are being represented and empowering them to create their own content as well. If you want to learn more about how to create good immersive reality content, I have two great resources for you here. The first is the Digital Library Federation special issue on immersive technologies. And I've highlighted two pieces by Jasmine Clark, but the entire issue is full of examples from across the disciplines, and also the special issue of the Journal of Interactive Technology and Pedagogy on immersive technologies, which of course our wonderful host has a piece co-written in that I've highlighted here. So again, the links are there for you in the chat, but there's really a wealth of information in these two special issues. I want to highlight one specific quote from Jasmine Clark from the DLF piece. And here, Jasmine's kind of tackling that empathy question. And full disclosure, I took Jasmine's class on creating accessible virtual reality, which was amazing, and I can't recommend it highly enough. And Jasmine Clark is working on a fantastic virtual reality application where they're digitizing the Charles Blockson collection at Temple University, which is a collection of African-American ephemera. And they're doing this in order to educate Philadelphia K through 12 students on library literacy. And you may be wondering why Philadelphia public school students need a virtual reality application to learn library literacy. And that is because currently, out of the 219 elementary schools in Philadelphia, they only have 4 librarians, 4 total. So the vast number of K through 12 students in Philadelphia never enter a library and have no knowledge or access of how to use a library. So this application is for that. And you can see here Jasmine's excellent advice to think about interrogating ability, but not appropriating it, and to introducing these technologies to students in a way that examines their positionality and the power hierarchies at work in these applications. So you really want to have learners consider ways to deconstruct the immersive realities and think about the juxtaposition between what they're seeing in the screen versus what they're experiencing in the world. 2 examples from my own experience that I think do this really well is the Pen and Slavery Project. So for those of you in higher ed, this may be ring true for you as well. But what this is an application created entirely by students at the University of Pennsylvania to create an alternative tour of the campus that explores the institution's relationship to enslaved people. So the students worked tirelessly, honestly, with librarians in the archives to research families of enslaved people that were part of the University of Pennsylvania. They interviewed those families, they did oral history work, and then the tour you're seeing is points on the campus where you take your phone, and when you're on that point, you will see a 3D model of the item from the archive that corresponds to that point. And then you hear from those families their story. So you can see Caesar's story, which is my personal favorite here on the screen. And the beauty of this is that you can do this on campus and take, a very physical tour while you're there in West Philadelphia, or you can do this from anywhere in the world. You can do this from your phone, in your office. And what I like about this is it's making visible stories that have very much been purposely rendered invisible by the institution. And it provides an alternative to the admissions tour, right? We all get an admissions tour when we go to an institute of higher education. We're used to kind of seeing that highlight reel of everything they want to show off. But this uses that same format to subvert it, to offer this information that had really been hidden for, decades, if not longer. So I highly encourage you to click on that link and to experience that. And another, again, wonderful example from my context here in Philadelphia is this Sacred Geographic Superimpositions, which was done by Dr. Sinatra Smith at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. For those of you who aren't aware, the Philadelphia Museum of Art is actually quite expensive. It costs about $30 to go per person. And it's quite an intimidating place. I'm sure most of you know the rocky steps, right, that lead up to the Philadelphia Museum of Art. But it houses, some amazing collections that are, for those reasons, somewhat walled off from the community of Philadelphia itself. So Sinatra Smith, as a CLEAR Fellow, created a walking tour of Philadelphia that highlights public art so that you can see without, paying, without needing access in any kind of way. But that highlights specifically art by Black artists and about Black communities. So you can walk through Philadelphia, and she created these 3D scans you see, and she kind of narrates the importance of the art and what it means in context. So both of these examples, I think, are doing what both Lisa Nakamura and Jasmine Clark were calling for in their work, to be more thoughtful and critical in the creation of their immersive content. Okay, so I'm going to pause for 1 minute before we get into these tools to see if there are any questions before I introduce some ways of doing this. Do we have any questions that I should address before I get into the tools? Everything clear so far? Okay, great. All right. Okay, so you might now be wondering how you might do this yourself if you wanted to create immersive content. So I'm highlighting tools here that I personally have used, that I've worked with students and faculty across the disciplines to build projects, and that I know are reliable and that are easy to implement. So the first one is Scaniverse. One of the reasons that I and that my student fellows love Scaniverse is that it works on your phone, right? So it works on an iPhone 11 or newer, or an Android 7 or newer, and it also works on iPads. So even if students don't have smartphones, I can send them to the library or to our media lab, and they can check out an iPad to use where this application would work. It is completely free to use, and it is extremely simple to do a scan. It takes seriously about 6 minutes to get a basic scan of an object. So for example, I have a 19th century stereoscope in my office, right? An original VR viewer. I just put it on my desk with no special equipment, no special lighting, just my awful office lighting. And I was able to do a really high resolution scan where I was able to look through the lenses of the stereoscope. I was able to read the back of the cards. I was able to see the grain of the wood, right? The intricacies of the illustration, all in 5 minutes with just my phone and no other special equipment. I also like this application because it will export, and you can see here in my screenshot this export model. It will export to a variety of formats. So if you want a format that you're going to look at online, that you're going to put into a virtual reality application, that you're going to put on a digital exhibit or that you're going to use in augmented reality. You want an STL file. But if you want to actually 3D print, which is another talk entirely, but if you want to 3D print one of these objects, you want OBJ files, and this will easily export to either one. Makes it very, very easy to share. You can also export it to an application like Rhino or Blender or a variety of other 3D modeling softwares to, enhance or process those models. So it makes it really easy to capture and really easy to share. Luma 3D is another free application that can be used on your mobile device. One reason I like this is because it allows you to do pretty large scans, so larger objects, think human-sized or above really well. I find Scaniverse to be a little bit better for smaller objects. It also allows you to either capture that object as just an object or in context of the room or space it is in. So you can, capture a statue in a courtyard or capture a person, standing in a room. So you can view it either way. You can view it in its context or as an object alone, which can be really helpful in certain circumstances. And then last but not least is Adobe Aero. This is the one I usually have my students use if they want to create a scene. So maybe they want to, have an entire house, an entire building, an entire room. Adobe Aero is really good at capturing that. You can also import 3D models from other applications and add them to your augmented reality application. So there are many free sites to grab other scans from cultural heritage museums around the world, institutes around the world. So you can kind of mix and match your own scans with scans from elsewhere. It is free to use, but if you have an Adobe license through your institution or personally, you get like enhanced features, right? If you have a license. Adobe Aero is also currently still in beta. It's been in beta for 3 years. I don't know if it's ever getting out of beta. I don't find it to feel like a beta application, but it's important to note that according to Adobe, it is still in beta. It is not finished yet, according to Adobe. All three of these applications will allow you to create great 3D scans, 360-degree scans, and augmented reality objects that you can use in a variety of ways. When we're talking about building virtual reality spaces, it's definitely going to be more difficult, right? It's a little bit higher of a learning curve, but even a beginner can use Art Steps. I say if you can make a Google slideshow, you can use Art Steps because it provides templates. As the name suggests, this is really meant for creating galleries, right? So digital exhibits. You want to create a digital surrogate of your physical exhibit, or you have already scanned objects that you want to curate in the context of an exhibit. Art Steps is for you. I use this in a variety of ways with students across the disciplines. We had a wonderful class called Blackness in and Out of the Museum, where every student curated their own exhibit on what Blackness meant to them. We're using it currently to curate a greatest hits exhibit for our Peace collection, which is the world's largest collection of ephemera of peace. And their 100th anniversary is this fall. So we're creating an exhibit for that. It provides you with very clear templates where you can kind of just drag and drop 2D and 3D objects to make a virtual gallery. Really very easy to use. The center one you see here, spatial.io, I would say is intermediate, because if you do have a little bit of coding knowledge, you can do a lot more, but you can still use it with absolutely no knowledge whatsoever. The other nice thing about spatial.io that is Not true with art steps is that you can create a multiplayer space. So basically you can have many people in your space interacting with the space. The image that you see there is from a university in Vietnam who almost all of their students are fully remote. So they have created a series of 3 interlocking museums to showcase their library collections, since again, students almost never come on campus. And this is actually an award-winning application, their library. So it's called Vinh University Library. And the image there is what they call their Museum of Environmental Intelligence. So you can view these both with a web browser, on your desktop or laptop, but you can also view them in a VR headset, again, with multiple people interacting in the same space. And then last but not least, if you or your team, your group, your students have some coding knowledge and are interested in creating really high quality applications, then you most likely want Unity, which is an open access application, or Unreal Engine. Even though there is a steeper learning curve, they do have an incredible documentation with a very robust community that will help you. We both at the University of Pennsylvania and now at Swarthmore, there used to be entire classes dedicated to Unity, and now they don't offer them because students have already taught themselves Unity before they start college. Because anyone interested in creating video games, these are what they need to know. So they've already taught themselves using tutorials and online resources. So even though it is a steeper learning curve, it is very possible to teach yourself. So now what we're going to do is spend some time playing with one of these applications. And I have a set of provocations to start you off. The first is, can you imagine a 3D scanning activity for your class, team, department, or community? What objects would be meaningful to scan, and how would you contextualize those objects? The next one is brainstorm a hypothetical assignment asking your group to design and curate a virtual exhibit. What would the prompt look like? What archives could you explore? And what research would be necessary? And then the more open-ended questions of any other possibilities that you can envision. So you're going to take some time now. I'm going to share the link to the slides again, just in case you don't have them. And you're going to pick a tool to play with, and I will be here to answer questions and help you as you go.
Hey, I put the links in the chat, and then the mobile device ones you can download from your app.
Yes, they're both in Apple Play Store and Google Play Store.
Yeah, if you don't have them already.
I'm already downloading some of the apps. This was so informative. Thank you.
If we were in person, I would show you some of my scans on my phone, but of course it's hard to show a screen on a screen, but they are really very easy to use.
Maybe, although you can't share them, how about could you describe like what kind of things that you've captured?
Yeah, and actually, you know what? I can send you the link to the Luma AI app because that you can see without a mobile device. Hold on one moment. Okay. in the chat, sorry for the long link, but this is a scan I did of a item from the piece collection. So this is a protest sign meant to be carried in a peaceful protest. And it's a dove. The reason why it's important to scan this item, my folks who work in archives will understand this. It is made of cardboard and tissue paper. It is a nightmare to store and preserve. We really can't let patrons touch it. And also, we can't keep it on site because of the humidity and potential for mold in our on-site archives. So we have to store it off-site. It is also, you can probably tell by the person in the background, it's very large, right? It's like 3 feet by 2 feet. It does not fit on a shelf in our archive. Very, very difficult to deal with. And it will not last forever, right? Eventually this item will deteriorate. So I used the Luma app to scan that dove. You can see how beautiful the render is. You can zoom on it, you can scan, you can interact with it in a variety of ways, share it in a variety of ways.
I mean, that already is so powerful in thinking about the use of immersive technologies, right, and augmented reality to decolonize the archive, to decolonize the age, right? It's really powerful.
I will also share this site, but hopefully you can see this. Here's some of our other scans from the piece collection. So this is the protest bus here. And on our website, you can play with it, click and drag. But if you look at it in a mobile device, you can see it in augmented reality. So you can see it in your space. This is an engraved block. So this is meant to be used in a printing press. But because it's an archival object, we did not want to, put ink on it or subject it to the pressure of our Vandercook number 4 that we have in the library. So we actually scanned it and then recreated it in the makerspace using 3 different methods. First, we 3D printed it. Second, we did a laser cut of linoleum, entirely in linoleum. And then third, we cut the image out in linoleum and then mounted it on reclaimed oak from campus. And then we tried all 3 in our Vandercook press. And we actually, for the Get Out the Vote event before the election, we had folks upcycle t-shirts and tote bags with this image on it. So a really fun way to get folks interested in the piece collection, to kind of showcase what we have there, and to use new technologies to access old technologies, right? Thinking about how, the analog digital continuum, right? It's not a binary, it's a continuum. Everything's always both.
Yeah, and thank you for I feel like you gave like great examples of things that, it's all ephemera, right? But
Yeah.
things that from like protests that are really not even meant to exist beyond that point. And we're always having conversations about like, how do we preserve basically the memory of an event, to actual items that might be in a collection. So it's like a new way to think about like, what do we preserve and how do we preserve it? This new technology kind of allows us to have these conversations. There's so many protest memorials, events that only exist in the moment. And so we want to be able to preserve it so that we can have conversations about it at length,
Yeah, and we want to bring new life to these objects. A lot of folks don't even know, what we have in our collections, even on our own campus, right? So to try to draw awareness to some of the items we have in our collections, the significance and relevance to these collections now. And also, again, to bring new life to them, like with this printing press block, right? Like we can use that again now because of the new technologies. And then if you go to enter the gallery now on our website, this is our work in progress. So this is using art steps, and this is a digital surrogate of the atrium in McCabe Library, our main library. And this is where all the items are going to live. So we're going to have, 2D objects and 3D objects here for the 100th anniversary celebration. So you can kind of see what that will look like here. And again, you can view this right on a laptop like this or in the VR headset. So this is our summer project that we're working on. Also, all the documentation is right on the link there under documentation. We have everything that we've done is documented here, including full tutorials for all the applications we've used.
Could you put the, I don't know if you already have, could you put the link to that in the chat? Unless you already did.
Here you go.
Oh, you did.
Yeah.
Right there. Okay, perfect. That's great.
And then here's the home page of that site. All of the galleries and scans are under Immersive Realities, and then the top link, the LibLab syllabus, is the fellowship that I run for students to learn how to do this work. So everything is done with students, and they wrote all the documentation.
This is great. I love how easy these the apps are to use.
They're really easy.
I mean, especially in comparison to like some of the other super expensive scanners.
Yes. When I first started thinking about how to scan some of the items in our collections, people were recommending scanners that were from $10,000 to $100,000. At Penn, we, had a $100,000 scanner, but it was only for Penn Museum. It was only for the, kind of 2 professionals who were trained on them to use. You had to make a request, sometimes wait a really long time for that request to be filled. With these scanners, I can let students in a class start scanning immediately. They don't need any training on how to do the scanning. They need training on how to work with the archival objects, absolutely. But they don't need training with the scanner itself, and we don't have to kind of let someone else do the scan while we're watching, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm. So we have a question in the chat from Harper. Have you ever explored photogrammetry?
Yes, that's a great question. So photogrammetry is great if you have a photography background or a photography professional that you're working with. What I'm showing you here is all LiDAR scanning. Photogrammetry is basically taking your regular SLR, right, camera and taking about 1,000 images of an object and stitching them together. If you already have those skills and you already have a photography studio with that equipment, you're going to get beautiful research quality scans. My team is actually taking a photogrammetry course this summer with the professional from Yourscape, that application I mentioned. He's going to be in town scanning the Independence Hall in Philadelphia and is then coming to our campus to give us a course. But I don't recommend photogrammetry if you don't already have that photography background, right? Like if you are learning the basics of how to use a professional camera, right? That's along with trying to do photogrammetry at the same time, you're going to find it a very difficult process. But if you already know those basics, it's a great way to get very high quality, like again, research quality scans. If you're looking for LiDAR scans that are really high quality, research quality, here's the scanner I recommend. It's called the Revo Point. It's at a much lower price point to the one I just mentioned, the Einscans or the Spiders, which are again ranging from $10,000 to $100,000. This one, all in with all of your equipment, is like $1,000. So again, you can be comfortable with students who you've given basic training to to use it, but it will produce very high quality, like research quality scans. And it has the post-processing software included. You will want a very high-powered computer to run the post-processing on, or else a scan can take, 24 hours to render if it's a very large object. We are using this scanner for our ornithology collection, which is a collection of 850 taxidermy birds. Yeah, my job is endlessly interesting. um, so we need research quality scans of some of those birds, and they range from very small to, a peacock and a pelican that are huge. So we're using that scanner for that kind of project.
I have a question. And thinking about once you do these projects, how do you archive and maintain an ethically like sunset and immersive project, especially the ones that are rooted in marginalized communities?
Yes, that is actually my my next slide is is that those are the exact questions, my important considerations. Let me see if I can bring those up. Here you go. And I'll let folks still kind of play around with some tools here, but those are exactly my next important consideration. So before embarking on any immersive realities project, you first of all really have to think about rights and permissions, right? All of the materials that I'm working on are part of our collections, and we have very clear donor agreements behind these collections that state very clearly what we can and cannot do with these objects, right? So we're only scanning objects that we have these permissions for. And even though we have permissions for them, we're of course writing very clear metadata and citing them appropriately, which you would want to do for any objects that you're scanning. You need to, use we use IIIF, but you can use, your standards for metadata creation and citation. And we really do want to think about not only the communities that these objects are coming from, but also the audiences that they're intended for. So I'll give you one example, and I can only tell you a little bit about this and you'll understand why. I am working with 2 faculty members in linguistics who are creating a virtual reality application to teach an endangered Native American language. There are no living speakers of this language anymore. The last person who spoke it fluently died 15 years ago. So they want to teach the younger generations this language before it is lost forever. However, it is an embodied language. You cannot speak or write it without moving your body. So, for example, if I wanted to say like, I'm going to pass Gabby the cup, right? There's a physical movement to that sentence. I can't just say it or write it down. So we're creating a virtual reality application that can capture those movements for this language pedagogy. And this application will only be available to this community. It will not be available outside of this community.
Well, you're not kidding when you're saying you have a very interesting projects.
Completely fascinating job. I love my job.
But I just want to make a quick comment about how important these tools are for community archives, for example, like ours, and the work that we do in the community to partner in the preservation of their histories and their collections. And I'm fascinated by this, but the apps, I'm already playing with it because it opens up for the opportunity to go out there, of course, with all the archival, the permissions and all that, to be able to help them preserve these kind of objects and then share it with them. I think this could be, I want to say life-changing, but it changed the game, right? I'm thinking about collections. We have a huge collection that we're thinking about that is full of memorabilia, small things, coins and things like that. How do we do that? We can't bring it in because we're a community archive. We don't have the space. But how do we help to make this available because the owner wants to make it available? This
Yeah,
is a
absolutely.
way to do it.
Yeah, and sometimes you don't want to acquire these collections. You want them to remain with the communities, right? You don't want them to be part of your institutional collection for a variety of ways. I will tell you, we are working on a project right now with the Chester community, which is the town next to Swarthmore. And there have been there's a group of environmental activists in Chester who have been active for many years, and they have a huge collection that they want to digitize and make available. Most of it is from protests and from their activist engagement in person and online. So we're using GitHub, which is a free to use tool to store all of the scans and all of the archival information. And then we're using a very free to use and very easy to use front end called Collection Builder to kind of build the interface for that collection. And they will both have, 2D and 3D items, but also, they have videos, they have transcripts, or they have all sorts of things that will live in that collection. But the reason we're doing that way is so that it lives with them, right? That the GitHub, that the scans, that the storage, it all lives with them. It doesn't live with us. It's not on our institutional servers. It's not Swarthmore's property. It is their property. And we basically hold these kind of data-thons where we help them digitize their collections and we help them understand, how to access the GitHub and how to access the collection builder and how to use the tools. And we do that in their community center, not on our campus. If you are looking to store items on your, long-term preservation and sustainability, so we preserve the 3D scans in our institutional repository, which is Islandora. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Islandora, very common repository platform. So all the 3D scans are saved in high resolution files on Islandora and on an external hard drive. And then we make lower resolution versions for the applications you see, like the virtual gallery and the website. Otherwise, it would take a really long time to download and view if they were very high resolution scans. So we have lower resolution scans for that kind of lightweight engagement, and then higher resolution scans for again, like the research quality scans that researchers might need to access.
Yeah, I'm also thinking just based on Carolina's comment, the ways in which you can also get community involvement in creating a digital space, and supplementing the archive, in getting people to participate in creating that space, so there's stuff that, someone might have from the institutional perspective, and then community members might want to share on an app, scanning and then sharing that way. We do have like a lot of post-custodial collections. So that's also a way in which we can put the archive back into the hands of the community, right? And I can also see these apps, like I was looking at the Scaniverse that allows you to map things.
Yes.
So I think that would be really cool to be able to invite people to add to it as well. So maybe they don't want any sort of donation, but they can share it on an app like this. And that's just like a really new way of approaching collaborations.
Absolutely. And I actually did some research and found a bunch of local libraries, public libraries in your area that offer a lot of these services. So, the Tech Link at the Houston Public Library and these digital media labs that are across a number of local public libraries, a lot of them offer 3D scanners or and or 3D printers. And they also offer a large number of other kinds of AV equipment. So if you needed a microphone or a camera to do some of the oral history work alongside these projects. And then of course, your institution has a lot of great examples of this as well. So the Cougar Lab, which is this image here, has this exhibit that, let's see, I have up here, right here, this initiative to engage with Mesoamerican art, right? That they're doing some of this work here. So you'd certainly have experts on campus who I think could help guide you through some of this process, especially if you want to move from creating a 3D scan to moving it to virtual space, like you can see in this GIF that keeps replaying. They have examples all across the disciplines here on their site. And then there's also this CAGE project, which is looking at more of the sciences, but I think again, there's like experts on campus that you could contact to get access to some of this equipment and to kind of brainstorm with or alongside in your area.
I know we asked a bunch of questions, but are there people in the audience who have questions or who want to respond to the provocations about these different technologies and different apps?
Anyone have great project ideas now that they've seen some of these possibilities?
People are probably still playing.
It's so easy to fall in love with this stuff. We've been wanting to do more of this, bring in immersive realities and VR experiences and those things, those types of that technology into the archive. So this is wonderful. We're gonna begin to practice with it and just think through how best to do it and it makes me think about is there I know you gave us a lot of information as in a lot of literature to read as to how to position the work and not to erase and all the question all the issues on empathy, right, and to contextualize where we're talking from. But is there like a cheat sheet that you all have prepared that kind of helps you think through as you're working on your project to
So I wouldn't say that there's a cheat sheet. I do think that those two guides, the DLF guide and the JITP special issue, offer a lot of that, especially the work. If you look at the DLF issue, there's like specific guidelines around accessibility and thinking through your audience's needs. But one thing I can't emphasize enough is in any form of media that we teach, whether it's a documentary film or a novel or a television show, right? We always show students examples. We always model the work, critique those models before, right, engaging with creating our own content. So I recommend the same thing. So my students create virtual and augmented reality projects for their final in my course, Virtual Bodies, Virtual Worlds. And to do so, first, I present them with a half dozen applications that we critique closely, just the way you would critique any form of media in the humanities, right? Thinking really critically about those forms of media, writing reflection papers, writing and analysis papers on those forms of those applications. Then I have them research their own applications that they want to, do an environmental scan, right, of applications that are similar to the one they want to create, critique those applications, right, and before ever starting on their own, right? So just remember that there is content that exists that you can engage with first, that your team can look to as models, and you can think about, the ethics of those creators and the content that they created, and which you think were exemplary and which you think maybe deserved more criticism, right? And why. So always kind of go through that process first, just like you would any form of scholarship, right, before starting your own project. I'm also happy to share my assignment sheet for that, which might be helpful, maybe.
That's awesome.
Yeah, okay,
Yeah, that's a fantastic.
great.
There's a couple of comments. I don't know if people want to unmute themselves and mention them, or if they want us to ask the questions.
Is there a way that you can collect this all into one document? That's a great question.
I think, are they all in the PowerPoint?
I think they're mostly in the PowerPoint, maybe not the LibLab link, but everything else should be. I think I'm looking back. Yeah, I think everything's in there except for the LibLab, the link to our LibLab site.
And there's a comment from Eliseo Jacob.
Oh, yes. I work with activist writing groups in Latin America. They have community spaces that come and go. Is it possible to recreate these spaces virtually from archival photos? Yes, there is actually. So there's a very powerful free tool called Blender. It is the preferred 3D modeling software in the humanities and arts. There are tons of free resources, but there's also there's free classes you can take through things like LinkedIn Learning or like other online possibilities. But Blender actually allows you to basically, you can like build the space three-dimensionally, and then you can texture the walls with real pictures of that space, if that's making sense, right? So I took a class on historical reconstruction that did this. So, we had blueprints of a building that no longer exists, and we went through the steps of recreating, right, that building using Blender. So that would be definitely my recommendation. Blender, again, completely free and open access, and really, I'm going to say easy to use, but only in so much as that there's just so many free tutorials to follow out there. But the hard part is to get your brain to think in 3 dimensions. That might sound funny, but for those of us in humanities, we are very used to thinking in 2 dimensions. And to kind of recalibrate your brain to think in 3 dimensions is the hardest part of learning a tool like Blender. Whereas if you have training in engineering or architecture, right, your training from very early on might have been in 3 dimensions. So yes, my recommendation is definitely Blender for that. I did want to grab the link to my syllabus for you. Just give me 1 second here. All right, someone click on that for me and make sure it works. That's from it's my final project for my course from our institutional repository. Should give you a nice open access
It works.
version. Okay, great.
Oh, it's very generous of you. Thank you.
Yeah. Just another plug to use your institutional repository to share all of your materials.
That's so powerful. That's the beauty that we found through digital humanities work, how generous everyone is in sharing the resources and really having the opportunity to work across the discipline. One of the things that we always read, I'm sorry if I'm overstepping here, but when we use other people's syllabus, let's cite them on our syllabus that we're using somebody else's syllabus, because it allows us to begin to show that network of that research, right, that's done before you, as you're planning your own syllabus. We have time for one more question or comment. Is there anything else that you'd like to add, Amanda?
I'm gonna go back to my slides for 1 minute. So let's see. So if you see this image, sorry, that's the wrong one. If you see this image here on my important consideration slide, that is actually, we were talking about working with the community. So this is a collaboration. You see all those young kids there. My campus is on an arboretum, Scott Arboretum, and the director of educational projects for diverse audiences came to us and said on Arbor Day, they get between 200 and 300 children at the Arboretum, and all the kids want to climb the trees. And they don't allow them to climb the trees, but they do want them to be engaged with the trees and learn about the trees. And she asked me if we could do some sort of virtual tree climbing application where the kids would get to climb the trees, but also learn about the importance of the trees. So I partnered with our GIS expert on campus who has access to a drone, and we 3D printed an attachment for my 360-degree camera, which is an Instamax Pro camera. We attached my 360 camera to his drone, and we then virtually climbed the heritage oak trees on campus and created a canopy tour of all the heritage oak trees. And then the director of diverse programs at the Arboretum created a voiceover teaching the important information about the heritage oak tree that she wanted to impart to the children who attend this Arbor Day event. And then the image you're seeing there is we actually set up 15 VR headsets for the children to do the application. And then if you see in the very back of that room, we had our educational psychology lab. It's called the Kid Lab at Swarthmore. They set up surveys. So half the room did the application with just music, and half the application did it with the voiceover, with the educational content. And then they did a survey based on like how much did they learn, their learning engagement with the application. So it was a collaboration with the Arboretum, with the Kid Lab, with instructional technology, and with the libraries, all to create this application. We had over 200 kids do the application and fill out the surveys. So it was a really amazing project for us, and the kids absolutely loved it. I mean, we got phenomenal feedback. And that's just the kind of thing that I would never have come up with on my own. I was just listening to the needs of my community. They came up with the idea, and we kind of pieced together ways of making it happen with what we already had available to us. And it ended up being a huge success. So this is just kind of a reminder to kind of like listen when people come to your door with an idea, and to think about ways that you could make it happen with what you already have, and that you don't need to be the expert in all of the areas of the project, right? I had the director from the Scott Arboretum who did the voiceover. I had my friend from ITS doing the drone work. We had students who edited the footage. We had the Kid Lab who recommended the music and did the surveys. So think collaboratively, think across the disciplines. You do not have to be an expert in everything. You just have to, find collaborators that you trust with a vision to make this all work. And then I just, of course, want to thank you all for inviting me, for providing these resources, and a very special shout out to Roberto Vargas, my colleague here at Swarthmore, who helped me vet all of the examples that I showcased and talked through all of the examples that I showcased here. You can always email me. The email is right there for you with any questions. I'm always happy to help. I am going to be one of the DEF CON mentors again this summer. So if you're looking for mentorship in this area, please consider applying for one of the DEF CON teaching grants. Let's see if I can grab you a link really quick for that. Yes, I can. Okay. I'm going to put the link to this in the chat. If you're looking for mentorship in areas like this, there you go.
That's wonderful. Thank you so much, Amanda. Thank you everyone for joining us today. This is just wonderful and such a wonderful presentation. We've been your fan for a long time, and we loved all the work that you're doing. And I mean, I'm so happy that you're ending with this last one, because we're always thinking about how can we really be present in our local communities, especially with younger generations, right? That it's crucial that we work with them, that we give them the tools, and that we get to empower them and meet them, where they're at, right? And so it's what a great example.
Well, the feeling is mutual. I'm a big fan of all of your work as well. Thank you so much for your time and attention today.
Thank you all. So we have just a couple more announcements as we depart. So we have our Manos a la Obra, which is our own workshop here with the US Latino Digital Humanities Center. We have a sliding scale for pay as well for that. And so we invite you to consider attending or sharing that with your communities. And it's all virtual. And then the other thing that we also have is my colleague Carolina and Maria Cotera and Anne Marie, ahora se me olvida el apellido. Perez, and are overseeing the next publication of Debates in Digital Humanities, which will be focused on US Latino digital work. So we invite you to submit to that. I know our deadline for initial proposals is May 15th, but we will most likely be extending that deadline. So please reach out. Again, I can't thank Amanda enough for an amazing workshop, and you know where we're at. Follow us. Hold each other close. I know we're all going through some difficult times right now, but it always gives me so much joy to see all the powerful and engaging and important things that we can do with digital humanities. It certainly gave our Latino recovery program, the archives, another life and another opportunity to make things available to our communities. And I know that there's so much more to do, and I think we've already identified a whole bunch of new friends who signed up today. So thank you, Amanda, again, and my colleagues Carolina and Lorena for all their work. We'll see you guys on the next one. Take care.
Thank you.
Thank you.